Hello, and welcome to the Wednesday, 30th of July edition of A Proud Malcontent. Earlier today, I published an article which uh, uh, compared John Swinney's strategy for independence with the processes followed by various other countries. The conclusion drawn from this comparison was that whereas all these other countries took some kind of action which prompted a course of events which led to independence, John Swinney's strategy, by contrast, proposes no action whatever. All his strategy amounts to is vote for us and have faith. I don't do faith. That article, based on a comment in the National from James Murphy, thank you, James, mentioned Norway as one of the examples of a real world independence movement. It happens that Norway is what I consider the instance that is most meaningfully comparable to Scotland. There are enough similarities for such a comparison to make sense, although making too direct a comparison is likely to be misleading. Uh, there's a capsule timeline of Norway's independence process produced by Gemini Advanced AI. It's online. I don't know if I want to talk through it all the way. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Norway's path to independence from Sweden in 1905 was a culmination of a long period of increasing Norwegian nationalism and a desire for greater self-determination within the Union. Here's a timeline of key events. January 14th, 1814, Treaty of Kiel. Denmark, having sided with Napoleon, was forced to cede Norway to Sweden. This ended Norway's centuries-long union with Denmark. May 17th, 1814, Eidsvoll Constitution. Norwegians rejected the Treaty of Kiel, declared independence, and adopted their own liberal constitution. This date is Norway's Constitution Day and a major national holiday. Summer of 1814, Swedish-Norwegian War. Sweden invaded Norway to enforce the Treaty of Kiel. August 14th, 1814, Convention of Moss. A peace treaty was signed. Norway accepted a personal union with Sweden, but crucially retained its own constitution, its own parliament, the Storting, and significant internal self-government. The Swedish king became the king of Norway, but Norway was not to be incorporated directly into Sweden. Growing Norwegian nationalism and grievances. This is from the mid-19th century to early 20th century. Throughout the 19th century, Norwegian national sentiment grew. While initially a largely equal partner, Norway increasingly chafed under Swedish control, particularly over foreign policy and the lack of its own consular service to promote its rapidly growing merchant fleet. The Storting, Norwegian parliament, gradually gained more power, asserting its will against the king. Early in 1905, Norwegian Prime Minister Christian Michelsen formed a coalition government with the explicit goal of establishing a separate Norwegian consular service. The Storting passed a law to this effect. May 27th, 1905, King Oscar II, the shared monarch of Sweden and Norway, refused to sanction the Norwegian bill for a separate consular service, arguing it went against the terms of the Union. June 7th, 1905, Norwegian Declaration of Dissolution. Michelson and his government refused to countersign the King's decision and resigned. The Storting then passed a unanimous resolution declaring that the King had ceased to function as King of Norway, effectively dissolving the Union. This date is celebrated in Norway as Union Dissolution Day. August 13th, 1905, a Norwegian plebiscite to legitimise the Storting's unilateral declaration and demonstrate popular support. A referendum was held in Norway on the dissolution of the Union. The result was an overwhelming yes vote, with 99.95% in favour. 368,208 votes for, 184 against. August 31st to September 23rd, 1905, Karlstad negotiations. Despite initial Swedish threats of military action, negotiations began in Karlstad, Sweden, between Norwegian and Swedish delegates to peacefully resolve the dissolution. September 23rd, 1905, the Karlstad Convention is signed. The negotiations concluded with an agreement on the terms of the peaceful dissolution, including demilitarized zones and arbitration procedures. October 9th and 13th, 1905, the Norwegian Storting on October the 9th and the Swedish Riksdag on October 13th both voted to accept the terms of the Karlstad Convention. October 26, 1905, Swedish recognition. King Oscar II formally renounced his claim and any of his descendants' claims to the Norwegian throne. This marked Sweden's formal recognition of Norway's independence. November 12th to 13th, 1905, referendum on monarchy. Norway held a second referendum to decide whether to remain a republic or become a monarchy. Voters overwhelmingly chose a monarchy. November 18th, 1905, accession of Håkon VII, Prince Carl of Denmark, was formally elected and accepted the Norwegian throne, taking the name Håkon VII. He arrived in Norway shortly thereafter, cementing Norway's full independence as a constitutional monarchy. Norway's independence in 1905 is often cited as a successful example of a peaceful, negotiated dissolution of a union, particularly given the initial tensions that nearly led to war. I think you'll see what I mean about similarities, but note also the differences. You will see also how the example of Norway illustrates the conclusion of the article, which is that independence doesn't come from waiting, it comes from acting. Note how the declaration of dissolution precedes both the confirmatory plebiscite and the negotiations with Sweden. There are lessons here that the nominally pro-independence parties in Scotland desperately need to learn. One of the points where the comparison between Scotland and Norway breaks down is the outcome of the latter's referendum on the dissolution of the union with Sweden. The people of Norway voted overwhelmingly in favour of dissolution, with yes taking 99.95% of the votes. No ambiguity there. A yes vote of this magnitude is vanishingly unlikely to happen in Scotland. We might match their turnout of 85.42%. In the sham independence referendum of 2014, we managed a turnout of 84.59%. But it's safe to assume that in a proper constitutional referendum, the most that we can expect for yes is around 70%, well short of Norway's 99.95. This is because there is a hard core of unionists and British nationalists who will never vote to end the Union. This hard core accounts for around 20% of the electorate. Allow for switherers who switch from yes to no in the voting booth and such like, and you're left with maybe 75%. 75% of an 85% turnout is around 64% of the whole electorate, which is pretty decisive. But if the vote drops to 65% while the turnout remains 85%, that is only 55% of the electorate, much less conclusive. If the vote is 70%, but turnout falls to 75%, that is 52% of the electorate. A vote of I was having trouble with these figures here. A vote of 65% on a turnout of 75% is less than 49% of the electorate, breaking that psychologically important 50% barrier. Please note that I am not suggesting any qualified majority requirement for a proper constitutional referendum in Scotland. I'm merely making the point that a result as convincing as that in Norway is almost certainly not achievable here in Scotland. And that psychological barrier at 50% is very real. So it's pretty knife edge. It's a blunt knife, but it's a knife edge. I am firmly persuaded that we must do everything possible to make the outcome of our independence referendum as conclusive as possible. I am further persuaded that calling the 2026 Holyrood election a de facto independence referendum will not produce a sufficiently decisive outcome. As noted earlier, there is a hard core of voters who are never going to vote yes. We will never persuade them to vote for independence. But we have to ensure that they can accept the outcome when it is not what they voted for. Of course, in a democracy, the losers are under an obligation to accept the will of the majority. They may campaign peacefully to overturn that choice, but a clear democratic vote must be respected. No doubt there is a hardcore of the hardcore who wouldn't accept even a 99.95% yes vote. But we must work to make it as difficult as possible for them to cast doubt on the result. We can be sure that every opportunity to dispute the outcome will be seized upon by the British state and unionists or British nationalists in Scotland. Doubt is corrosive and it must be reduced to the absolute minimum. Pretending an election is a referendum would leave far too many cracks to be exploited by those intent on preserving the Union. An election is never binary. Referendums always are. Multi-option referendums are possible, but very rarely happen because they require multiple elimination rounds of voting to get to a final binary choice. A proper constitutional referendum must be binary. An election cannot be binary. Elections are always about a whole range of issues. The referendum question would be just another election issue. Opponents could easily claim that people may have been voting for something other than the referendum issue. They could cast doubt on the outcome, perhaps even mount a legal challenge. It is worth noting here that the Scottish UDI plan gets around this by introducing a binary element with the Manifesto for Independence. And it does not propose using the election as a de facto referendum on independence per se, but on the power of the Scottish Parliament to legislate for a constitutional referendum, which is rather less of a contentious issue and more likely to be supported, more likely to provide a big mandate. Both the SNP and ALBA party appear to recognise that a de facto referendum on independence cannot be conclusive, as neither is proposing that it be determinative. They're not proposing that it be conclusive. When electioneering, both parties talk about the 2026 election as if it might decide the matter. They talk of the people's choice. In reality, however, the people would not be choosing independence for two reasons. Firstly, because independence is not what is being offered. What is being offered by the SNP and ALPA is negotiations with Westminster in the forlorn hope of getting independence. Secondly, because what they think they're voting for cannot be delivered. The Scottish Parliament lacks the power to deliver independence. Therefore, even if the vote was really a vote for independence rather than merely a vote for negotiations, it would be a vote for nothing. If the nominally pro-independence parties thought a yes vote on a binary issue in a decidedly non-binary election could be determinate, there would be no need to negotiate for independence or seek a Section 30 order so as to have a sham independence referendum to back up the pretend referendum. The Scottish people are sovereign, which means that when we choose independence, that choice has to be determinative. It has to be the final word on the matter. Therefore, the choice must not be vague or ambiguous or tentative. A de facto referendum is all of these. What is meant by independence anyway? We are told that we can vote for independence in a de facto referendum, but the term is never defined. We're not told what ensues from this vote, supposing it's a yes vote. There is no answer to the what next question, other than negotiations, which the British may or may not turn up for. Remember, in the Norwegian case, there was various steps taken. As James Murphy's examples show, the precedent is that independence is established before negotiations begin. It is not independence that would be negotiated. It is non-negotiable after the people have decided. When the SNP and ALPA talk of negotiations with Westminster, they cannot be referring to talks on a post-independence settlement, because independence hasn't yet been declared. This is how confused the nominally pro-independence parties are. In truth, they haven't a clue about the process by which Scotland's independence will be restored. They aren't even thinking about that process. They are thinking only of electoral success and the rewards that this entails. Others are thinking about the process. That is why we have the Scottish UDI plan. Parts of the SNP membership have also been thinking about the how of independence. That is why we have the Newington Resolution that has been submitted for debate at the party's October conference. Therefore, this is the wording of the main paragraph of the resolution. Therefore, Conference agrees that the SNP shall put in their manifesto for the 2026 Scottish Parliament election that if a majority of SNP and other pro-independence MSPs are returned to Holyrood in 2026, they will bring forward a bill to assume responsibility for constitutional affairs as directed by the people of Scotland. This will include the right to hold referendums on increased powers and independence driven by the will of the people. If there are similar moves afoot in Alba Party, I have no knowledge of them. The Newington Resolution is, as you possibly recognised, informed by the same perspective on the constitutional issue as the Scottish UDI plan. It is a perspective that is unconcerned about electoral success. The imperative is not to devise a strategy for winning elections, but to develop a process which allows us to choose independence in a manner that is conclusive and beyond challenge. A de facto referendum simply won't do. And that's the end of that. As you may have gathered, I was reading there from the post that I put up today. I intended this as one of the ways for this show for Proud Malcontent that I would actually write an article first and then use it as the script for the show and then post it. But out of habit, sheer habit, I ended up posting the article before the show. So that's my fault. I'm now left with nothing much to talk about, except perhaps a little more on the Newington Resolution. It's called the Newington Resolution because it is being proposed by Newington and Southside, Newington and Southside, Edinburgh branch of the SNP, is particularly responsible for is a chap called, I suspect a lot of you may. It's, as I say, is based on the same thinking as the Scottish UDI for a referendum on the powers of the Parliament, on the rather than on independence, as I've just said, a referendum on difficulties, and it makes it makes little sense anyway. As I say, the 2026 election be used as a de facto referendum. The SNP in its way, which is just vote for the SNP, and ALAPA and perhaps others in a different way as it counts all pro-independence votes. The, they are different in that we say that it should be a referendum on the powers of the Scottish Parliament. And these parties are not proposing independence anyway. They're not proposing that it be a vote on independence. This is where a lot of people get this wrong. They think it's just a case of voting for independence and then it just happens. It doesn't just happen. There has to be a process. That process, in my opinion, and I've given this a lot of thought, that process must include a bill being passed in Parliament to dissolve the union with England, a dissolution bill, just like Sweden. And my proposal is that the Scottish UDI plan is that we actually vote for independence. We put a bill for independence through Parliament first, so that there is an Independence Act on the statute book. And then we have a confirmatory referendum. This will be a referendum on an actual proposal so that people know exactly what happens after a yes vote. They should know exactly what happens after a no vote as well. But knowing the unionists, I think that'll be left a bit vague so that they can basically do whatever they want, just as they did in 2014. But that is a sensible way to go. As I say, Norway has these lessons for us. And if you look, there is a process and it's legal all the way through. It's legitimate. It's democratically legitimate. There's a parliamentary process. Everything's taken step by step. That is the correct way to do it. Somebody the other day made a remark about Scotland being like Somaliland, or it was something like that. So I immediately thought, well, I was going to ask this person, list all the similarities between Scotland and Somaliland. Then I actually went, I thought, no, I better not say that until I know what I'm talking about. That's the way I operate. So I went and had a look at history of Somaliland and its efforts to become independent. And it's surprising how many parallels can be drawn with Scotland. And how many parallels can be drawn with an independence process in general. It's worth taking a look at to see the efforts that the Somaliland government goes to keep everything legal and constitutional. And what it shows, along with Sweden, Ireland, all the other countries in James Murphy's list, what that shows is that Nicola Sturgeon's idea, and therefore John Swinney's idea of legal and constitutional being only a Section 30 referendum, is utter nonsense. There are many other legal and constitutional ways of going about it. You just have to ensure that you follow the steps. And you ensure that each step is impeccably democratic. It's not that difficult when you already have a democratic parliament, a democratically elected parliament. All that's necessary is for that parliament to stop being an agent of the British state. We can do that. We can force it to stop being an agent of the British state, if in 2026 we vote in favour of a manifesto for independence, which says that the Scottish Parliament will assert its legislative competence in constitutional affairs. Now, if you assert your legislative competence in constitutional affairs, that is a de facto declaration of independence. So the Parliament would then cease to be an agency of Westminster, a branch, an arm of the Westminster Parliament, and it would become again the Scottish Parliament. I maintain that the Scottish Parliament that was convened in 1909, as Winnie Ewing said, that was the old Scottish Parliament reconvening, but it was given back to us. It had been taken from us in 1707. It was given back to us in 1999, but it was given back to us in chains. What we have to do is break those chains. That is what Scottish UDI is about. And that, interestingly, is what the Newington Resolution is about. If the SNP adopt the Newington Resolution, and if the leadership act on it, that's two very big ifs, I realise, but this would be equivalent to the SNP signing up for the Manifesto for Independence. Mike, by the way, Mike Wallace, who I think is the main drafter of the Newington Resolution, he prefers to call it a Manifesto for Scotland's Right to Choose. And it is that. I swithered over calling our one, instead of Manifesto for Independence, the Manifesto for Self-Determination. But I didn't do that in the end because I didn't want to encourage the confusion and conflation that there is between the terms self-determination and independence. But that would be quite fascinating if actually the SNP became the first to sign up to what is basically the Scottish UDI plan. Other parties, ALPA, for example, I always expected ALPA to be the first. I expected ALPA to lead the way. But if the SNP leads the way, then ALPA will have to follow suit. Likewise, if ALPA had gone, if ALPA had signed up for the Manifesto of Independence, if they'd agreed to that, if they'd adopted that, I suspect they would have seen a sharp spike in their poll ratings. And that would have been the kick in the arse that the SNP leadership needs. And I think we then would have found the SNP leadership being forced to back down. What would be interesting would be if ALPA looks at the resolution, the Newington Resolution, is cautious whether the SNP could actually adopt this resolution and force the leadership to comply with it. So it's possible that ALPA might move before the October SNP conference. That would be interesting in that it would completely change the whole atmosphere, the whole environment when the resolution comes before conference for debating catching up with ALPA. So that would be very interesting, and that option is still there. It's still open to ALPA to take the lead on this, to stop using independence merely as an electioneering device, and actually make a commitment to specified action within a stated time frame. That's the game changer. That is the game changer. What we have to do is what I've been trying to do for a long time now is keep this the idea of the Manifesto for Independence and Scottish UDI, keep these things as much in the spotlight as I possibly can. To just be constantly talking about it and constantly posting about it on social media, constantly writing about it in my blog, just so as to keep it always out there. I haven't been all that successful. The sign-up signatories to the Manifesto for Independence petition are still around 700, which is pitiful. And here we have a way of actually getting the independence cause moving again, and there's just so little interest in it. It seems very strange to me. The Newington resolution is the same. We have to work, whether we're SNP members or not, we have to work to keep that in the limelight, to keep it better. By the same method, just keep constantly talking about it. Use the hashtag Newington resolution. Just to keep it there, because the more it's publicised, the more difficult it is for the SNP leadership to kill it, which they will undoubtedly try to do. The first hurdle is to get the Newington resolution on the conference agenda, and that could be problematic. That could be problematic, given that the leadership don't want it there. And the SNP has changed so much since I was a member that I'm pretty sure the leadership can now dictate what goes on the agenda. It's supposed to be decided by an independent committee, but I'm pretty sure John Swinney has a veto in there. We can make it more difficult for them to veto it, to kill it, if we keep it, as I say, in the limelight, keep on talking about it, just the same as talking about Scottish UDI, because both these things are important. The Newington resolution is just about getting the SNP back on side with Scotland's cause. The Manifesto for Independence petition is about getting all of the parties back on side with Scotland's cause, because there is absolutely no doubt that they're not there at the moment. They're letting us down. I hesitated there because I often say that they're either failing or they're betraying Scotland's cause, and you can make up your mind about which of those is best applicable. I have a message here from Tex Thompson. He says, the Scotland Bill breaches Scotland's right to self-determining governance as it gives government a veto. Yes, that is so. But the UK government doesn't claim that it has a veto. It doesn't deny our right of self-determination, and it doesn't veto our right of self-determination. It doesn't prohibit a constitutional referendum, but it tries to block it. It tries to put obstacles in the way of it, impediments. And of course, the Scottish government collude with this, because basically they haven't got the guts to do anything else. They don't actually claim a veto, but it's as good as a veto, because if they can say now is not the time, they can always say now is not the time. And besides, if the only referendum we can get via the British state is a Section 30 referendum, then that is not a proper constitutional referendum. It is not a formal exercise of the right of self-determination. It's a glorified opinion poll. It couldn't possibly lead to independence. So it could be said, Tex, in a way that it is a veto. It could be said that it's effectively a veto. It's effectively a veto so long as the Scottish government is prepared to accept that Westminster has that veto. That is an asserted authority. Power is not given, power is only taken. Westminster has taken our power to have a constitutional referendum. Just as they gave us back our parliament in chains, they give us back our right of self-determination, all bound up in more chains. It's always limited. It's limited by the conditions of a Section 30 order. So, yes, Tex, there is, in a way, a veto there. The Scotland Bill needs challenge strongly. It's undemocratic, bad faith legislation, absolutely no doubt about that. But I'd rather see the whole Scotland Bill go, which is what happens when the Parliament, Scottish Parliament, passes a bill, enacts a bill to dissolve the Union. The Scotland Act is automatically repealed as far as Scotland's concerned. Only the Westminster Parliament can actually repeal the Scotland Act, but we can simply say it no longer applies in Scotland because we've dissolved the Union, pretty much the same as Norway did. And the choices facing the British state will then be very similar to the choices that were facing Sweden at the time. Sweden's only real alternative to accepting the dissolution was to go to war. And Norway and Sweden had just fought an extremely bloody war. It was hellish, It was like a rehearsal for World War One. And a lot of the mechanized warfare that was deployed in World War One was around for the Norway-Sweden war, and it was extremely bloody. And there's no appetite in Sweden or in Norway, for that matter, for another war. And Christian Nicholson, of course, was banking on this. He would know damn fine that there was very, very little chance of Sweden invading, starting another war. The public simply wouldn't have stood for it. The generals probably wouldn't have stood for it. Again, much the same applies in Scotland. The public are not going to, the public in England are not going to back invasion of Scotland. I'm sure they'll find the whole notion laughable. The generals won't. The generals will take it quite seriously, and they will quite seriously say, no, we ain't doing that. We ain't starting another mess like we got into in Northern Ireland. We are not doing it. It's often thought that the prime ministers just order the generals to do things. Well, they don't. Like a monarch, the Prime Minister only issues a good monarch, I should add. The Prime Minister only issues orders that he knows will be obeyed. They avoid issuing orders that they know will not be obeyed because that weakens them, that undermines their position. If imagine if Starmer ordered an invasion of Scotland and the generals said no, and it became public knowledge. If Starmer did what he usually does and goes into a press conference before going to Parliament and says we're going to invade Scotland, and then the generals turn around and say no, we're not. That is Starmer done for. He has no option but to resign in a case like that. He'd be immediately facing a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons in any case. So what text says about the Scotland Bill needing challenge is correct, but it has been suggested. I've seen suggestions that we should seek the repeal of various parts of it, or the repeal of various parts of Schedule 5, Schedules 4 and 5, which basically lay out the powers of the Scottish Parliament, what is reserved and what is not. I prefer to use the word withheld rather than reserved, because that is what those powers rightly belong with the Scottish Parliament. They are being withheld, and that withholding is illegitimate. So it's perfectly legitimate for us to turn around and say, right, you're not withholding those powers anymore. So what the Manifesto for Independence does, and what the Newington Resolution would have the SNP do, is basically repeal that part of the schedules to the Act, which reserves to the Westminster Parliament. I'm thinking the wording here. I think the wording is all matters relating to the Union, which means all matters relating to the Constitution. So we would be effectively repealing that, but we would go beyond that. Simply repealing the bit that says that reserves all matters relating to the Union just leaves us able to deal with matters relating to the Union, whereas asserting full powers over constitutional affairs, as per the Newington Resolution and the Manifesto for Independence, doing that, asserting full powers over the Constitution, is a de facto declaration of independence, because if you have powers over the Constitution, you have powers over everything. So those who actually want 2026 to be a de facto referendum on independence should support both the Newington Resolution and the Manifesto for Independence, because both of those would lead to what is in effect a declaration of independence. And the de facto referendum on independence, as I said earlier, the de facto referendum on independence proposed by the SNP and ALAPA would not lead to independence. It would lead only to negotiations, which the UK government might or might not turn up with. And I'm very, very wary of such negotiations. That is where the British state gets very, very dangerous, because they've had hundreds of years at this. I am not fully confident in Scotland's own political elite to remain steadfast in the face of the UK government's techniques. But where was it going with this? Yes, it is effectively a declaration of independence, because asserting powers over the Constitution, full powers over the Constitution, amounts to a declaration of independence without actually saying it. And that is quite important, because actually saying it makes it difficult for people to accept, even people in Scotland. There is not, as I should be talking about on Sunday, there is not, as is claimed, a majority for independence, a sustained majority for independence in the polls in Scotland. There is not. My statistician, my pet statistician, has done the work on this, and I thank him for that. And I'm going to try and get my head around it all, so that I can talk about it on Sunday's show. But there is not a sustained majority for independence. So making the referendum about independence makes it more likely to lose. And even if we win it, which I suspect we would, it would not be by a convincing margin. It would still be a win. Of course, it wouldn't be winning anything because the Scottish Parliament can't deliver that. But it wouldn't be convincing. And as I said in the talk earlier on, excuse me, there is a psychological barrier there at 50%. And the closer you get to that, the less convinced people are, the easier it is to question and to cast doubt on. And there are already reasons, ways that unionists can cast doubt on a de facto referendum, the fact that it's not a referendum, for being one of them. So making it about the powers of the Scottish Parliament makes a win much more likely, and it makes it much more likely that win will be decisive. That's because the Scottish Parliament is actually quite popular. When people are asked, and things like the social attitudes, so when people are asked about the powers of the Scottish Parliament, they are prone to saying yes, that the Scottish Parliament should have all these powers. The only two things that in the past, I don't know that there's any recent polling on this, but in the past, the only thing that the public was not in favour of, a majority in favour of, were foreign affairs and defence. Given recent developments and certain historical factors like Iraq, I'm wondering now if people would be quite so keen to leave defence and foreign affairs in the hands of Westminster, if they would not now prefer to bring them home where they belong, like everything else. People are generally supportive of the Scottish Parliament. There's, I think I saw in a poll just the other day, I think, and this is, I shouldn't quote these figures from memory because my memory is unreliable. I think there was about 7% who wanted to see the Scottish Parliament, Holyrood, abolished. There's always been that little clique that's always been there, and I don't think it actually matters very much. But that means that 93%, or it should mean that 93% favour the Scottish Parliament, or are prepared to put up with it, or just don't care one way or the other. Yeah? There's a lot of that. But being that the Scottish Parliament is more in favour among the public, it's much more likely that they would vote for a manifesto commitment for the Scottish Parliament to assert powers over the Constitution, over constitutional affairs. So the advantages to the Scottish UDI plan and the Newington resolution, the advantages built into these things are quite major. They give us a quite major advantage. So you might ask, why haven't any of the parties adopted this process, this approach already? And there's a simple answer to that, or two possible answers to that. The first is that they simply didn't think of it. The second is that they are too scared to do it. That's about it, because it does call for politicians to be quite bold, and as I think you'll realise, if anybody ever watched Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, and the minister or prime minister's reaction to being told that some proposal of his was very brave, was immediately to shite himself, because they're not for being brave. Brave means taking risks, and they don't want to take risks with what they have. That's the simplest explanation. I can't believe that they haven't thought of it, but I can easily believe that they are scared to do anything. That's why we need to support the Newington resolution and Scottish UDI, the Manifesto for Independence, because we have to lend them some of our courage. That'll do it for today, I think, before my voice goes completely. Thank you for joining me, and I will be back with you at 10 a.m. on Sunday. Bye.